I'm Dr. Stan Steindl. Welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt, where today I'll be in session with Kristy Arbon. Kristy and I first met in about 2014 when she co-facilitated what was my first experience of mindful self-compassion with Dr. Neff and Dr. Germer. She has worked extensively in mindful self-compassion, being a certified teacher and administrator of the Centre for MSc. And she has many other strings to her bow, not least developing over recent years her Somatic Self-Compassion program, which has been evaluated in a recent study published earlier this year. She is a wealth of knowledge and wisdom about all things self-compassion. And so I do hope you enjoy being in session with my friend Kristy Arbon. Well, welcome, Kristy Arbon, to Compassion in a T-shirt, in session. And it really is delightful to catch you again. We were just saying that it's been 6 or 7 years since we first kind of met. You were very busy at the time, though, because you were actually helping with facilitating the mindful self-compassion course that I was on, along with Chris Germer and Kristin Neff. That really was a turning point for me, that experience. And I think you've talked about this too, that there was just that pull for me as well, just drawn towards that experience. And then, of course, very, very emotional and meaningful and powerful. And really, I am ever grateful to you as well as Chris and Kristin as well, just for that experience. It certainly changed my life, as it does for so many others. And since then I've kind of watched a bit with awe with all that you're doing, and you have involvement in so many things. Heartworks, of course, is your training and kind of program delivery business, I guess, and then still the Centre for Mindful Self-Compassion. I think you're still kind of really closely involved there. And then there's this other new project around Somatic Self-Compassion as well, and you published your paper earlier this year, which was really great to see all of that come out. But I wondered if we could just start. So tell us a bit about all of that, or tell us a little bit about you and your story.
So, well, maybe I'll go back a little bit. So I've been a mindfulness and a meditation practitioner for quite a long time, about 3 decades, I guess. And have been involved in sort of the Buddhist community, both here in Australia. So I'm sort of in Australia and the US. It's a long commute, but my family's here in Australia. My husband and his family are in the US, so I'm in Australia at the moment. Have been interested in a spiritual path and a contemplative path my whole life, basically, for as long as I can remember, have been interested in those things. And when I did one of those job suitability tests in high school, it came out as you should either be a nun or a social worker. Right. Which is sort of a neat combination, and it's actually sort of what I've ended up doing. Yeah. I studied psychology and social work at university, and fitness leadership as well, just throw in something a bit different. But through a bunch of different jobs and experiences, have ended up teaching mindfulness and self-compassion. And I'll say I teach self-compassion because I see that as a necessary precursor to compassion for others. I think if we can't be compassionate to ourselves, we don't know what it looks like when we're wanting to offer it to others. So I don't explicitly teach about compassion, because for me, if you have self-compassion, you are automatically going to be able to relate to other people, to understand the common humanity, to understand stress and to normalize stress. So it's going to automatically happen. And that's just my perspective. I know that's not everyone's perspective, but that's where I come from. I was the center manager at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies in Massachusetts. And this is where I met Germer and became passionate about mindful self-compassion, and yes, had a very emotional experience in my first mindful self-compassion course. Had this experience that we talk about in mindful self-compassion of backdraft. So this big experience of all these emotions coming up, which were around, oh my goodness, I have never been compassionate towards myself. I've never given myself this level of kindness and acceptance and love. And just that realization, it brought up feelings of anger. This is you would think this is unusual to feel anger in a self-compassion course, but I was angry. I was confused at the anger, I guess, because anger is not really a socially sanctioned emotion. So I was confused, like, why am I feeling anger? That's not right. I shouldn't be feeling anger. So confusion over that. And then this massive wave of sadness and regret over having missed a lifetime's worth of self-compassion, basically, because I'd started to feel what it was like to give myself self-compassion. So that sort of opened up. And I think this is a lot of people's experiences. Big emotional experience. This is how I could be relating to myself. And this is how I've not been relating to myself. And so that sort of precipitated a number of events. I started working with Chris and Kristin and helped them to start up the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion in the US. And then from there, so that was back in 2012, it's nearly 10 years ago. From there, that organization has just grown. Mindful self-compassion has become quite a well-known program. So yeah, from a seed it's grown into a massive tree now, a global tree, which is pretty exciting. So I was quite involved in that as an administrator and as a teacher, and a little bit as a teacher trainer and a consultation host. And there's a little part in mindful self-compassion where we talk about the fight and flight response and the release of cortisol and oxytocin, so the neurochemicals involved. And we do a little bit of self-soothing in mindful self-compassion in the first session. And I was really interested to expand on those. And so this is where somatic self-compassion came from. Thank you so much for mentioning that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, two of the things I was really interested in exploring were, what is the mechanism of stress and what are the neurochemicals that go with that? And how can self-soothing help with that? And that all led me to learning more about trauma and the stress response and the, fight, flight, freeze, faint, all those different things that we do in a trauma response. So I learned a lot about that. I learned about how tricky it is to get in contact with our internal landscape when we have trauma in our story, and learned about interoception, which is our ability to feel our internal landscape, and how to gradually develop that skill. So that's part of what's in the Somatic Self-Compassion program, how we can soothe through all of our senses, through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, through our vestibular sense, through balance, through proprioception, our sense of our body in space, and through interoception. And so we can soothe through all of these senses. And so that's a big part of somatic self-compassion as well. As you said, there was just recently paper, we finally had our paper published, I think in about February this year, Your paper is cited, you might have seen that, your paper's cited in my paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was really interested, yeah, I was really interested in the motivation to practice self-compassion,
Yes.
which is what you folks were looking at. So we did look at motivation to practice self-compassion. What helps with that, basically. We didn't find a lot of stuff there, but we asked the question anyway, motivation to practice self-compassion. So yeah, that sort of brings me here. I guess the one piece I would add is along the way, I've gotten quite involved in trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive mindfulness. I've learned a lot about that, and I've been teaching that to contemplative teachers and therapists sort of more recently. And somatic self-compassion is explicitly a trauma-informed approach. So that's a big part of what I do is a trauma-informed work. Yeah.
I mean, it's just fascinating to listen to that whole process. And the thing that I really sort of strikes me and I admire in all of that is just the kind of experiential discovery of it all. You know, that actually it's through living your life and opening yourself up to experiences that you have these powerful insights into sort of, well, different elements of yourself, and then, you know, curiosity kind of arises out of that, and then you kind of experience the next bit, and it's just been a really yeah, such a sort of powerful journey through all of these different things, and it's really interesting what you mentioned with the mindful self-compassion. First of all, the emotional sort of outpouring that happens there, and you know, you mentioned anger, and isn't it interesting that anger might come up in a self-compassion sort of context, and it's funny because I was reflecting that for me it wasn't so much anger, because I'm generally speaking okay with anger. I mean, that's one of the things that can come up with me. For me, it was absolutely the sadness and that the grief, really, and so yeah. Can you speak a little bit more there? You know, like what do you notice about sort of backdraft and people's experience there when they first touch on self-compassion and the different emotional kind of experiences? And I'm just really interested to hear a bit more about that piece.
Yeah, wow, it's a great question, and it's a huge topic, as
Yeah.
I guess you know. A couple of things come to mind, and this may not be true, but there's a gendered, as society says that different emotions are okay for different genders, basically. So, this may or may not be right, but as a man, anger's it's pretty acceptable. You know, you are totally allowed to express anger. As a woman, or a person who identifies as a woman, it's not as socially acceptable. So I'm just wondering if that was part of the difference for the two of us. I have been very unaccustomed to expressing anger. I've been very accustomed to repressing emotions or feeling a lot of sadness. Anger is a very unfamiliar emotion for me, and I know it is for a lot of people who identify as women. So that's just one of the thoughts. I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that. I mean, for me, I'm not sure that anger was. I think it is more acceptable for men, and at the same time, I think it has gotten me into strife over the years as well. So the expression of anger hasn't been always healthily done, you could say. You know, I remember as a little person, you know, sort of primary school, or you know, that sometimes the anger would be the thing that, you know, I'd get in trouble for, or it would sort of cause some sort of damage or something, and so it was sort of this interesting mix of kind of being sort of very connected to it and able to express it, but also, you know, getting me in trouble. Sadness, on the other hand, much more a feeling of vulnerability, and really over the years just wouldn't go there, and I think that was one of the life-changing elements of the MSc program, was just to get a little bit more in touch with more vulnerable, more gentle kind of sadness, because sadness
Mm.
before might certainly have been there, but it was behind anger, that was how.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just sort of thinking out loud in all of that, but that's the kind of thing I think happened for me. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear that. And I hope you don't mind me sort of mirroring that with my
Yeah.
experience growing up. Was I felt a lot of sadness, and I think I probably cried a lot, but I felt very weak in the process. Didn't really mind feeling vulnerable, just didn't want to be seen to be weak, or to feel the shame around expressing emotion. Never even considered that I could express anger. So you talk about it getting you in trouble. I never had the opportunity because I never could express it. And I didn't know a skillful way to do it, and there was no modeling for it. So yeah, I don't know. It's so interesting to hear that you had anger, but you felt that there were repercussions of expressing that. I felt sadness, and I felt there were repercussions of expressing that. And then we each got to feel the other one when we were adults, and we felt a bit more resourced to sort of to feel vulnerable. So my vulnerability allows me to feel anger, and your vulnerability allows you to feel sadness. And I'm, this is just you and me talking, so I'm not saying this is a general trait, but it's just really interesting to hear that.
There's many kind of ways in, and sort of things that might arise out of something like self-compassion. And you mentioned also another critical piece for me, at least too, was what you sort of, and you mentioned it, is sort of shame, and the role of shame actually in anger, and the role of anger in shame, and the way that those two kind of bounce a little bit off each other for me. And then I'm sure sadness is in that mix as well. So yes, it's very interesting to disentangle all of that. And I do agree, self-compassion kind of creates an opportunity to do a bit of disentangling, and kind of approachfulness towards the different emotions.
Yeah, there's a practice in mindful self-compassion called something like meeting unmet needs, and it's so we find we acknowledge the anger, and then just as you're saying, we find the sadness or the grief or the soft emotion underneath the anger. And then from there, we go to what's the unmet need and what's the negative core belief. So, we're diving down into all those levels. So a little tweak that I did, and once again, I think it was based on my gendered experience of being really in touch with that soft emotion, basically. It was harder for me to find that hard emotion, but I could find the soft emotion. So I did a little variation of that practice, and I actually, I've been teaching that a little bit. I haven't done it so much lately, but it was really around empowering ourselves to find the hard emotion to protect that soft emotion. I remember an experience I had in a hotel room, walked in on by a male hotel employee. It actually can be trauma triggering, so it sort of was. So I was feeling these soft emotions, and I decided, how might I express in the safety of my hotel room the hard emotions that I would need to feel empowered in this situation. So he had left. It wasn't something I did, with the employee, but I practiced channeling those soft emotions into anger. So I had to practice feeling anger. So, and I think I just did it with some physical gestures, maybe some jumping up and down, some fists, something like this. And that felt like the best self-compassion practice in the moment, because I felt vulnerable, and to use some parts language, my inner child or my inner children felt very unsafe, and they needed the empowered, angry part of me to say that was not okay, and to validate that that felt like an unsafe situation that was now over. But there was some emotions, there was some like fighting emotions that felt really useful. So yeah, it's just, as I said, a tweak on that, finding soft emotions under hard emotions. We could also channel some hard emotions to feel some empowerment. And this might be part of what Kristin Neff talks about when she's talking about fierce self-compassion. I've only read a little bit of that material, but I was channeling some fierce self-compassion in that particular practice.
Yeah, certainly compassion and self-compassion can be kind of textured with different emotions, can't it? It might be a very soft, gentle, soothing kind of process, or it might be about righteous anger or something like that. It's actually interesting to really practice that agility or something to sort of move about the emotional parts, and almost sort of bring them in, in ways that are still really helpful.
Yeah, there's been a movement in the mindful self-compassion community for some of the teachers who identify as men to be teaching other people who identify as men to, to teach them, or to validate that self-compassion can be this fierce protective sort of force. So almost trying to help those folks who identify as men to feel that it's okay. Self-compassion is not going to make you weak. It's not going to make you vulnerable. It's not going to make you a doormat. What it can do is help you to get in touch with your own emotions, to validate those, to take care of those, so you're not projecting them onto somebody else, and so that you can feel that righteous anger and you can stand up for other people. You can protect others through being in touch with these emotions yourself. There's this protective aspect of self-compassion. So yeah, there's been this movement to help folks who identify as men feel okay with the concept of self-compassion, and to know that it's not going to make them weak. And then on the other side, this movement by teachers who identify as women, speaking to others who identify as women, saying it is okay to feel anger. It channeled in the right way, in a skillful way, dealt with in a safe space, or dealt with in a way that doesn't turn into rage. So, anger and rage is that uncontrollable emotion, destructive emotion. And this is just my understanding of it. Rage can be quite uncontrollable and destructive. Anger gives me information that a boundary's been crossed, and I have the chance to make a decision with anger. I can choose how to process anger. Pretty hard to consciously process rage. It just tends to go out of control. So anyway, there's this move, and we mentioned Kristin Neff around validating, for those of us who identify as women, it's okay to feel anger, and in fact it's important, and you got to protect yourself, basically. Like, look at all the stuff that's happening in the world. You've got to be able to stand up for yourself, and self-compassion is really important. That you've got to value yourself enough to stand up for yourself, to protect yourself. And if you can protect yourself, you can protect others as well. So it's sort of all, this whole thing of, this is not just for us, this is for all of the people we're in relationship with.
I feel like those who might identify with men, somehow we've got to get them connected to their sadness as well, and find, because it's such a powerful force. Often those who are very angry scratch the surface a little bit, and there is the sadness, and sort of finding ways to work with that with perhaps those who identify with men seems sort of crucial as well.
And we're talking here about intergenerational wounds and intergenerational trauma and systems of oppression in our culture. And I'm not just saying, systems of oppression affect women, they affect men, like they affect us all. So the systems of oppression we have say men shouldn't get in touch with their sadness, and they say women shouldn't complain. And this is a really generalization. Everything I says, a lot of what I say is a generalization, but in general, this is what a system of oppression is doing. And so self-compassion helps with both of those. How do you safely get in touch with that sadness? And I totally get that would feel like a really alien concept if from a very young age, and I hear heartbreaking stories of little boys being told to don't be a sissy, like, act your age, don't cry, that's weak, don't get in touch with your emotions. If this happens when you're 5, oh my goodness, like that's decades worth of sadness that you have not known how to process. And I totally get that you wouldn't want to do that when you're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old. Of course, you've had all of that conditioning based on this sort of oppressive system. And then the same for those who identify as women. If you were told from a really young age that it was not feminine to express anger, and you would be rejected if you expressed anger. If as a maybe not 3-year-olds are they're pretty good at expressing anger, I think. As a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, you were shamed for expressing anger. Once again, that's decades worth of repressing anger that then, you're getting in touch with. And with self-compassion, you could do that safe. The word safely keeps coming to mind. How do I get in touch with sadness safely? How do I get in touch with anger safely?
Yes, there's often those shame memories, isn't there, associated with the particular emotion. For me, the shame memories are around, sadness or being weak or, all that, the sort of derogatory names boys get called, if they seem that way. And for others, the shame memories might be about anger and feeling shamed for that. And so then we start to approach these emotions and the shame memories come up, and they're like trauma memories in a way, aren't they? The relational traumas. And so then and then we've got the backdraft or the fears, blocks and resistances. And so then sometimes people are just like, I think I'll give it a miss, I guess. And so we're working hard to bring everybody in.
It's not one program or one movement that's going to help us to get in touch with sadness and anger. This is going to take generations. I think what's going to happen is over the generations, we're going to become more comfortable with these things. It's going to take a while because they're pretty entrenched, and systems of oppression are pretty entrenched because we all understand it, and to some degree we feel safe knowing what our place is in a system of oppression. So even if we're oppressed to some extent, at least we know what our role is. So it's going to take some changing of roles, and we've seen a lot of this in the US, the Me Too movement, the pussy hats. So these things are happening, these movements are happening, and a self-compassion movement has got to be happening. And I see a lot more fierce self-compassion happening, women feeling empowered and standing up for themselves. I guess I'm more in touch with that community. I don't know so much about what's happening in the community who identify as men, but I know there's definitely efforts in that area to help men befriend their emotions.
The MSC stuff, it really has grown exponentially. It's quite heartening, isn't it, really, to think just how many people now have kind of done some of that work, and it's really spreading. When you mentioned that before, it reminded me of the Paul Kelly song, from little things big things grow. And self-compassion, I think, really is like that. It's It's growing. You also mentioned the somatic stuff, and so this is a bit new for me. Like to hear some of this. I mean, I'm obviously I'm aware of things like the fight, flight, freeze, appease, or whatever stuff, and so on. But yeah, could you sort of capture a little bit for us the this notion of somatic, and somatic self-compassion? What's how would you kind of define some of that, or sort of elaborate there?
And I must admit, part of the reason I use the word somatic self-compassion is because that word's a little bit trendy right now. So, there's somatic experiencing, there's somatic stress release, there's a lot of sort of somatic stuff around. And I could have called it embodied self-compassion, but then mindful self-compassion is also quite embodied. So that seemed a little bit confusing. So I thought, so soma specifically relates to the body. So that's why the word somatic seemed to fit with that. So the main pieces of somatic self-compassion, and this is what came up in the study that we did that was published, was that we can learn how to more safely get in touch with our internal experience. So this is a very somatic experience, our internal experience. Getting in touch with our internal experience, or this developing our interoceptive awareness, our capacity for interoception, is a learned skill, and it may take a long time for us to learn to safely get in touch with our internal experience. But we talk about that in somatic self-compassion. So this is what interoception is, and this is why it's tricky to develop interoceptive awareness, and it's a lot to do with trauma. So as I know in a traumatic experience, often our emotions are overwhelming, and so our system has this really neat safety valve where it says, okay, if your emotions or your physical experience are more than you have resources to handle, then you have the capacity to dissociate, basically. And I know dissociation gets a bad rap, but that is ultimately intelligent response to an overwhelming situation, is to just leave, just check out, basically. So this is why a lot of us have trouble with interoception, because it's about checking in again. You were talking about men, or people who identify as men, not wanting to get in touch with sadness. But some of us have been checked out from our body for a long time. And so learning to check back in again needs to be done in a trauma-informed way. That's really, really important. And what that means, so for me and in the Somatic Self-Compassion program, getting in touch with our internal experience in a trauma-informed way involves a huge amount of choice. And not just saying you have a choice, listing all of the choices that you might have. So something that I might do in that program is I invite people to be aware of their environment expanded sensation. So this is their seeing and their hearing. And I invite people to notice that, like, how is it? How is it to anchor your awareness in seeing or hearing? And then I invite folks in closer to their body, as long as it feels okay. I say that a lot, as long as it feels okay. Know you have a choice. I invite folks to check in with body-centered sensations on the external part of their body. So touch, temperature, even some sensations that are below the skin, like pressure, where you're sitting or leaning against your chair. I invite folks to notice how that feels, and I keep reminding them, you can go back and anchor your awareness in sound or sight if that feels safer for you. And then the next level is internal awareness, so interoception, noticing how the inside of your belly feels, or the inside of your ribs, or any part of your internal experience. And once again, reminding folks, you can always go back to body-centered sensations external to your body, or environment expanded sensations. So this is how we gradually learn interoception. So I mentioned choice. So folks have a choice to do all of those things. They also have a choice with posture, so you can sit, you can stand, you can lay down, you can move, you can pace. I think I'm one of the few meditation teachers that says you can pace while you meditate. And ultimate choice is you could just stop doing this. It's completely okay. No one says you have to do this. Go and pat the dog, go and make a cup of tea. So just huge, just buckets of choice basically is really important. That's how we safely develop greater interoceptive awareness. And we can soothe ourselves through any of these body signals as well. So soothing might be, okay, it's a bit challenging to be with my internal experience. What I might do is rub my hands together instead, feeling a warmth of my hands. So I'm aware of an external part of my body. I'm still with my body, but I'm with an external part of my body and I'm moving. Trauma is really, it's about where we can't move. If we can tell our body, you can move, you can choose how to move, that sends a signal to our nervous system, you're not in a traumatic situation right now. So that might be how we soothe ourselves. If we're still feeling anxious or we're feeling triggered, we can move out to environment expanded sensations. So we might look at something that is pleasant, and that can be soothing as well. At the moment, I have rosellas sitting on a bird feeder outside my window, so I could look at those, focus my awareness out there as a way to soothe. That's sort of a big part of what somatic self-compassion is, learning to safely get in touch with our internal experience, having choice, and learning how to soothe through all of these different sensations. We're not often, touch is the main sensation that we learn, we soothe ourselves through in self-compassion. But and it's true that touch can evoke oxytocin in our system. It's that tend and befriend chemical, but it doesn't work for everybody. And sometimes we need to, especially in a trauma-informed environment, we just need to get away, move our awareness away from our body. So touch is not the thing we're seeing, is the thing that's going to soothe us.
Now that really helps. Actually, that was a good nutshell, and the three pieces there. The first piece, sort of checking in, becoming more in touch with the body, and that it's a learned skill. That really stood out to me, that it's a learned skill. I was actually at Pilates this morning, and I know this might be a naive point to make in terms of what the work you're doing is, but sort of the teacher there was having to constantly correct me, and I sort of realized that I wasn't really in touch with my body in that sense. I was having trouble really being aware even of how it was positioned in space, sort of thing, and kind of shifting it about, and that. So I really, just today, even especially, I really get that idea of it being a kind of a learned skill.
Yeah, I love that you say that, and I don't think you need to use the word naive at all. Like, your experience is very common. So this was a big part of what I wanted to address in somatic self-compassion, because I had the experience, sort of similar to yours, of going to a meditation group and having the meditation instructor say, just get in touch with your internal experience, and assuming that everybody knew how to do that. Yeah. And the reality is, and there's a statistic I read from the Strozzi Institute for Leadership, which is an American embodied leadership organization. And they said about 80% of the people who come and do their programs are not in touch with their body, are not in touch with their internal experience. And I've got a feeling we could probably extrapolate to the general public that probably 80% of us, like your experience, we don't really know what an instructor, how to follow an instructor's invitations around getting in touch with our body, or knowing how to move our body in a particular way, or knowing, understanding posture. Like all of these actually fall under the the definition, or they come under the spectrum of a interoceptive awareness. So there's a whole bunch of, things that you look for around, do I have low interoceptive awareness or high interoceptive awareness? And I don't really love these kinds of spectrums and these kinds of tests, so I don't tend to use them. But things like not being able to translate a fitness instructor's instructions into our body experience suggests, that that's a part of our experience where we have low interoceptive awareness. There might be other parts we have higher interoceptive awareness, but yeah, that's sort of a textbook sort of a case. And a lot of people have that experience. They don't know what it means when their yoga instructor says, rotate your right hip so that your right foot is at a 90-degree angle. Like, they just can't work out what that means. It's a very common experience. So yeah, this learned skill, there's one course that I teach which is around teaching people gradually to get in touch with their internal experience. And it's actually, I adapted a curriculum. It's called the Interoception Curriculum by Kelly Marler, and she's an occupational therapist in the US. So she puts out this curriculum. It's designed for children, but I adapted it for adults, and it's designed for children in a clinical population, children with autism or who have, problems with reading their body signals and things like that. But I mean, that's all of us. We're just children who grew with those children who grew into adults. So I adapted it for for an adult non-clinical population, and I let people know this is really just an introduction to developing interoceptive awareness. It's an 18-week course. Like, how many 18-week courses do you know that are called an introduction to something? So I let people know this is going to be a years-long process of learning how to get in touch with your body, because of this whole dissociation thing that many of us have done. Even if we don't call it dissociation, we call it checking out or just whatever else, whatever non-clinical term we're more comfortable with. But as I said, it's an intelligent response from our body. So yeah, that learning to do it, we really do need to learn how to do it. The reason it takes a while is because our nervous system is saying, this is not safe. This is not safe. This is not safe. This is not safe. And those warnings are going to be louder than anything else. So we want to do it very gradually in a way that can feel as safe as possible, basically.
And this is the choice piece, isn't it? In some ways, that there's so much flexibility there and options and kind of, take a couple of steps that way and then sort of just back away a little bit if need be. And that kind of being able to move about in this experience in a way that really helps to create a sense of safeness and graduated kind of experience and opting out completely for a while if one wants to. All of that choice is just so useful in terms of safeness.
If I understand down to my bones that I have a choice, like, that's massive. I think very few of us, even as adults, believe we have a choice. Like, we just feel like we're forced into doing so many things. Once again, it's culture, it's oppression, it's old stories that tell us, what roles we have to fill. There are like a million ways we feel we don't have choice. So starting to introduce choice is massive. And then the movement piece, one of the trauma responses is freeze. It's a big trauma response is the freeze, not being able to move. So moving our body tells us you are not in a trauma response. I think I mentioned this before. And when we move, we get little shots of endorphin in our system. So endorphin are the natural opiates, pain relieving neurochemicals that we feel. They come into play best during things like childbirth, massive pain, childbirth, breaking a limb. We feel endorphins there. We can feel endorphins a little bit when we move. And this is a big part of what I consider is a self-compassion practice, is in encouraging endorphins into our system. It's a great response to cortisol. So a lot of us feel a lot of cortisol. Moving in response to that is in the Somatic Self-Compassion program is one of the best things we can do. So just standing up from your seat, just that act, it's empowering. It tells me I can stand, and it moves endorphins into my system. So it seems very simple, but it's very effective, and I've got choice. Yeah.
Yeah. And then isn't it interesting, because we might sort of, it might begin with the cortisol. We might bring in the endorphins with the movement, and but then the third phase is the soothing, and sort of, I guess, the bringing it all sort of back down again, sort of thing, or something like that. The strategies, again, physically, or with touch or movement, or bringing online the other senses and so on. But then that's the kind of the soothing piece that comes after that.
We can oxytocin is, it's the best known neurochemical for soothing. So I think, as I mentioned, that's the tendon befriend neurochemical. It's the one that tells us we can trust the environment that we're in. And what I've learned, it's not just about being with people. We could be with animals, we could be in nature. Some of us, especially those of us who are introverted, we actually trust our animal friends and the natural environment. We might trust them more than we trust a lot of people. So oxytocin, in my understanding, it's not just about feeling safe and soothed with people. We can definitely soothe ourselves. So we encourage oxytocin by being with people or animals that we feel safe with, and we can also encourage it through soothing touch and gentle vocalization. So the soothing touch explains the, hand on the heart, or the self-hug, or the holding your own hand, or even rubbing your hands together, hand on the cheek. These are all soothing touches. They're also possible trauma triggers. So this is where choice is really important. Like, what if, this might not be soothing for some people, especially if it's related to a memory, a trauma memory. Gentle vocalizations is another way we feel oxytocin. So that might be the voice of somebody else we trust. It could be our own voice. We can talk to ourselves. And this is where, say, loving kindness for ourselves comes in. It's where kind self-talk comes in. I can find the caring part of me to speak kindly to the sad or the wounded part of me, and that can be very therapeutic, very soothing. But gentle vocalizations can also be my favorite music, or it could be nature sounds. We could also be soothed, like oxytocin is one of our well-being neurochemicals. Serotonin and dopamine are the other two. So we could be soothed by realizing that we're important in the group, that's serotonin, that we're special, that we're valued. We could also be soothed by feeling rewarded and food gives us a reward. So it's not just oxytocin that can soothe us, but these other dopamine and serotonin can do that as well. We talk about all of this in Somatic Self-Compassion, and learn which one we might gravitate to. So am I an oxytocin person? Am I a serotonin person? Am I a dopamine person? And where do I get these things from in my environment? Is it music? Is it my dog? Is it my grandma? Is it riding my bike? Where do I get this stuff? So lots and lots of choice around how we can soothe ourselves.
It's also beautifully individualized, isn't it? The first stuff around self-awareness and interoception, and that's very individualized in terms of one's own skill and where we're at, and then the choice is very much about personal choice and respecting that, and offering options, and then the soothing too. What's going to suit, and really drawing on the person's own wisdom a bit about that, and being able to kind of meet them at each step along the way where they're at.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is huge, isn't it? Self-compassion is not one size fits all. We all have
Mm.
different ways of doing it. And
Mm.
one of the ways that I do that in somatic self-compassion, back to sort of the motivation piece, which is what you folks were exploring, we
Mm.
spend a goodly amount of time in that program exploring our individual values and our strengths, and then working out what our goals are and how we might kindly motivate ourselves. So this is like a big piece of the start of it. And the reason I did this was because of your work,
Oh,
basically. Like, so thank you. It
yeah.
was
Oh,
awesome. It was awesome.
that's yeah.
Yeah. So we spend
So
4 weeks in a 15-week program just just cultivating motivation to practice self-compassion.
mm.
So then, once I understand what are my values and strengths, my goals and my motivations, I'm in a much better position to make those choices about how do I self-soothe.
Mm.
Where if I know what I value, then I know where I might look to get my sources of soothing. So if I value nature, that's where I might go for soothing.
Mm.
If I value community, that's where I might go for soothing. So
Mm.
yeah, absolutely tailor-made, and
Mm.
you know inviting folks to be very conscious about where these things are coming from. They're not just things we pluck from the air, they come from our own personality.
Mm. Well, you've got a lot of amazing stuff there, and stuff that you're offering, others and the world, and it's fascinating. I'll absolutely include sort of some links to this stuff in the description, and to your paper maybe, but also to your contacts. In fact, if people were wanting to kind of get in touch with you, or to engage with you and your work, how might they be able to do that most easily?
Yeah, well, I guess my website is probably the best place to go, KristyArbon.com. They can sign up for a newsletter there. I'm in a year-long program at the moment, so it might be a bit tricky to join that one partway through, but I will have a lot of offerings coming up. Everything's been online, but things are starting to open up, so there'll
Mm.
be some in-person stuff as well. And there were things that were cancelled because of coronavirus, so I had some neat stuff set up for Sydney in Australia before coronavirus came along. So hopefully
Mm.
that'll be up and running again. And then Singapore, Bhutan, and the US. Yeah, you can come to Bhutan for 10 days and study self-compassion with me and learn about the culture of Bhutan. So hopefully next year we'll be doing that one again. I've done that
Oh,
twice. It's an amazing experience. So
yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
highly
I
recommend.
have actually been to Bhutan.
Lovely.
So
Yeah.
yes, I didn't do anything quite as fantastic as that. I just did a trip around, but what a venue for that sort of work.
It's a
Um,
great place for self-compassion. I
mm.
remember reading an American woman who went to live in Bhutan, and she said, "It is really easy to be kind to myself in Bhutan because
Mm.
it's such a gentle culture." And this, I'm generalizing here, but the experience often is that it's a very
Mm.
gentle culture
Mm.
and you're invited to be authentic, basically. So, yeah, great backdrop for self-compassion practice.
I just wanted to ask you one last thing, yeah, I'd just like to see if I can get 3 tips from people that come on to Compassion in a T-shirt. Three tips that I guess you might offer others who are making their way on this journey of compassion or self-compassion. So, yeah, any thoughts there?
Find a supportive community and keep trying. If you feel like the community that you're in or the one you've found is not supportive, just keep looking. Just like you wouldn't stay with the first therapist you found. You'd find a therapist that worked for you. Find a community that works for you. There's so many communities online these days, so find one that resonates with you, that feels nourishing. Validate your emotions. Our emotions don't lie. They don't make stuff up. Our emotions are giving us information. No such thing as a wrong or a maladaptive emotion. It is all information, I would say. Thirdly, slow down. We're all going too fast all of us, we're all going too fast. You'll slow down, and then you'll realize, oh my goodness, I need to slow down more. And you'll do that, and oh my goodness, I need to slow down more. You don't even realize how fast you're going until you start to slow down. And you may never get to the place where you say, this is slow enough. So there's always room to slow down. That's what I would say.
Excellent. Find a supportive community and keep looking. Our emotions don't lie. They are sources of important information. And slow down, and then maybe slow down again. So that's really great, Kristy. Yes. I really appreciate you coming and having a chat today. It's so wonderful to hear the stuff that you're doing and to get a chance to spend so much lovely time with you today. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Stan. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thanks for all the great work that you're doing. I've loved chatting with you. Thank you.
Really good. Thank you.
Take care.
All right.